comes in, then the request will be forwarded into the middleware components inside, one by one by one. In this particular pipeline, everything is connected, right? There's no terminal middleware. We didn't create a terminal middleware. So requests will be forwarded into the first middleware, and then the second middleware, and the third middleware, and then it returns back. So that's our expectation. Let's set a breakpoint inside here, inside our first middleware, the second middleware, and the third middleware. Also, let's set a breakpoint over here. And then let's run our application. As you can see, our first breakpoint that is triggered is app.run. So as I mentioned, these lines of code, right, inside the Lambda expression will only be triggered when we receive a request. At this moment, we haven't received a request, therefore app.run will run first. That's why I put a breakpoint here, right? Let's actually remove the breakpoint and just run normally. Now, the first Lambda expression is triggered. That's because the browser is launched and a request is sent to the server. And if I just step over this, now you can see that we're going to trigger the next middleware. And if I go here, you see, we jump into the next middleware before we go to the next line, right? We jumped into here, and then we're going to trigger this. And now we're going to trigger the next middleware, which is middleware number 3. So F10 again, and we go into middleware number 3. And well, we don't have the next middleware anymore, right? So the next middleware is not there. Therefore, nothing is going to be triggered. Here, it's going to execute a write to the response. And then this Lambda expression is going to be finished. So once it's finished, guess where it's going to return? It's going to return back to the previous function where this function is actually called. Let's do F10 again. You see it comes to line number 22, and this is middleware number 2. We just finished calling this function. That's why this line is triggered now. So I'm going to do this, and then it's going to return back to middleware number 1. It's going to go to this line because we just finished calling the next function, right? And then we're going to click on this continue button. Now, of course, we're going to come in as the second request, which is the favorite icon. So we can ignore this. We don't need to worry about the favorite icon thing. Let's continue and removing all of these breakpoints, and let's observe the result. So we have all of these results all connect together, so it's not very clear. So let's actually add line breaks over here, and let's run it again without debug this time. All right, so you can see that we have first middleware before calling next, and then next is called, so therefore second middleware is executed, right? And then third middleware executed. And after the last middleware, which is the third middleware, executes, there's no next middleware anymore. Therefore, you see this, right? And then it returns back to the second middleware. Therefore, you see this. And then you see this. And then after that, it returns to the Castro server. Castro server forwards that response to this browser. Therefore, you can see the output right here. So we have used the app.use method and created 3 different middlewares. Middleware 1, 2, and 3. And all 3 of them are regular middlewares, which means that one middleware will forward the context object to the next one, and then to the next one. So these are all regular middlewares. But app.use method can actually also create terminal middleware. For example, if we want to make middleware number 2 a terminal middleware, which means that we're going to short circuit the pipeline, we can simply just comment out this line. When we comment out this line, it just means that we don't want to call the next middleware anymore, and this short circuits the pipeline. And that makes middleware number 2 a terminal middleware. Now, we can do it this way by just avoid calling the next request delegate. At this point, I just want to mention that if you want to create a middleware with the use method, but if you don't want to use the type, like you can do this, right? You can do it this way. There's no compilation error. However, when you do it this way, you will have to call the next delegate. So if I just comment out this, you can see the right squiggly line. So if you want to create a terminal middleware without calling the next method, the next delegate, then you should specify the parameter type here, okay, just like this. And then you just avoid calling the next delegate, and everything will return from middleware number 2, right? Middleware number 2 will return back to middleware number 1, and then everything goes back to the Castro server. All right, let's give it a try and see what happens if we do it this way. Right? We short circuit the pipeline from middleware number 2. Let's run the application without debug, and we should be able to see a different response browser. Okay, let's see. So we have middleware number 1 before calling, middleware number 2 before calling, and then because we are not forwarding that to the next middleware, which is middleware number 3, therefore we don't see middleware number 3 on the browser. We see the after calling of middleware number 2, and then it goes to middleware number 1. So this is how you can create a terminal middleware with the use method. Just avoid calling the next delegate. And just remember to specify the type of the parameter. All right, that is basically what I want to show you in this video. Just remember that the middleware is actually implemented by functions, and in these middlewares, they're implemented by Lambda expressions. You can definitely create a separate function and call it within here, separate function that takes these 2 type of parameters as parameters, and then you can just use it directly inside the use method. But here we're using inline Lambda expression for creating a middleware. And you also observed how the middleware are calling the next one, and then it returns back, right? Just like function calls, right? So this function calls then this function, and then the second function calls the third function. And when the third function returns, it returns back to the second function. And when the second function returns, it returns back to the first function. So this is how the middlewares are connected together. And also you have seen how we create a short-circuiting middleware, is also called terminal middleware, by just avoid calling the next delegate. All right, that's everything I want to show you in this video. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you in the next one.